Okay, so we know that the Roman Catholic Church required people to use images to represent the Lord, and so we may think that that was true in the early Protestant Church. I think the fact that the Protestant Church, as I know it, using images all the time, I assume that in the Reformation they continued to use them. However, an examination of the history shows quite a different thing, that actually the Reformed people did not use images to represent the Lord and considered such a practice to be idolatry. Way back in the beginning of the Reformation, you have the preaching of Wycliffe, and he influenced Huss of Bohemia, and the Hussites opposed the images to represent the Lord. They destroyed them in churches, and there was warfare with them and the Roman Catholics. Eventually Huss was put to death, was executed, but it was about that time that they destroyed the imagery that represented the Lord in about 500 churches and nunneries, places where the Catholics had their central teaching. In Germany, at the time of Luther, it's kind of a surprise to learn how much opposition there was to using images to represent the Lord. Some of the leaders there, Karlstadt for instance, was very much for totally destroying them, going into the churches and destroying them. Luther taught against using images to that extent. He considered it to be idolatry, and yet later there was some modification in the Lutheran Church. But it was a very strong movement at the time of Luther, so there was something happening in Europe at that time. Likewise over in Switzerland, Zwingli opposed using images to represent the Lord. He is credited by some of taking a more cautious approach and saying, don't destroy them until we do it decently and in order, even though some people actually jumped the gun on it and did some destruction in the churches. He said, let's wait until the people understand what the issues are and why we get rid of them and why we don't need them and why we don't want them and why they're idolatry. And so on a certain day they closed the church buildings. They went in and cleansed the churches of that which was contrary to Scripture. In Switzerland, of course, in Geneva, Calvin was called to lead the Reformation, and his teaching had a profound influence as he taught against using images to represent the Lord. And his teaching, the Reformed teaching, the teaching of the Reformers, spread through Europe and then over into Great Britain, where John Knox and others took a strong stand. Not only that, but in the beginning of the Anglican Church, as they formed their statement of faith, their doctrines, they had a strong statement concerning the idolatry of using images to represent the Lord. They then, that teaching spread in Great Britain, and the Puritans also understood the issue and preached that way. There was opposition back and forth. The Catholics did not like being called idolaters, and they thought we should use the images. Reformed people said we shouldn't. Eventually the Pilgrims, the Puritans, came to America, others from the Anglican Church, and when they came at first they did not use images to represent the Lord. In America, very interesting, that we probably are not aware of today, but there was a strong opposition to using images to represent the Lord. And so in the beginning of America there was this opposition. They taught that it's idolatry. That meant that the Catholics were idolaters. So there was this opposition at first between the two groups very strongly, and we're probably not aware of how much opposition there was and how much they realized or understood and taught that it's idolatry to use images to represent the Lord.